In the autumn of 1892, the Ozark Mountains were wrapped in fog thick enough to hide whole lives. The hollows carried the cries of coyotes, and the oaks bent low under the wind's moan. Folks in nearby towns whispered of strange things happening in the highlands. A new house rising where none should, its timbers dark as midnight, and its builder quieter than a graveyard. That builder was Silas Crowe, a widower with eyes that held the weight of every year he'd lived. He came with his two children, Eli, aged 10, and Miriam, just 6, hauling a wagon full of lumber that didn't look right. The boards were too narrow, too polished, too carved. When the local blacksmith, Hank Dobbs, helped unload them, he realized the truth. "These ain't floorboards," Hank muttered. "They're coffin lids." Silas only nodded. "Wood's wood, Mr. Dobbs. Doesn't much matter what it was before, only what it becomes after." And with that, he began to build his house. The sound of hammer and saw echoed through the valleys for weeks. Silas worked from dawn until the moon took its watch, shaping, stacking, sealing. Every wall bore the faint impression of carved names, some sanded away, others still visible under lamplight. Clara Jameson, 1868 to 1871. Mary Lou, beloved daughter. The children helped in silence. Eli fetched nails. Miriam painted the shutters white. When curious neighbors stopped by, Silas greeted them kindly, but never invited them in. Rumors spread. Some said Silas had lost his wife to the fever that swept through Missouri 3 winters ago, and that he'd built her coffin himself. One so fine he couldn't bear to bury it. Others claimed he'd bought the coffins from a bankrupt undertaker in Springfield, getting them for nearly nothing. Whatever the truth, the locals agreed on one thing: a house built from coffins was bad luck. By November, the coffin house stood complete, 2 stories tall, framed by the red blaze of autumn trees. Inside, the scent of cedar mixed with candle smoke. The floors creaked like sighs when walked upon, and at night a hollow tapping came from behind the walls. Still, Silas and his children moved in with quiet determination. On their first night, Eli asked, "Pa, don't the souls of the dead mind us living here?" Silas smiled faintly, brushing his hand over the carved lid that formed their mantel. "Son, these folks already served their time beneath the soil. I figure giving their wood new life is a kind of resurrection." Miriam, clutching her doll, whispered, "Then maybe Mama's spirit will find us here." Silas didn't answer, but he looked toward the stairs where a draft carried the faint scent of lilac. His late wife Clara had always smelled of lilac. One foggy morning, a stranger appeared. Reverend Amos Till, a traveling preacher known for his booming sermons and sterner gaze. He arrived on horseback, Bible strapped to his saddle, and called out to Silas from the gate. "Brother Crowe," he said, "this house is built from death. No peace can dwell where the dead are stacked as walls." Silas set down his hammer. "Reverend, I built this house with my hands, not my fears." But Amos persisted. "You think to raise your children among coffins? You tempt the Lord's patience." That night, the Reverend stayed in town and warned the folk at the tavern. "Mark my words, that house will see sorrow yet. The living shouldn't sleep in the company of the buried." Back in the mountains, Silas said grace at supper while thunder grumbled across the hills. When he opened his eyes, the flame of the lamp flickered, and for a brief second, Miriam saw a shadowy figure seated in her mother's old chair. Winter came early. Snow buried the valley roads, and the coffin house stood alone under its white shroud. Nights grew long and bitter, and the whispers began. Eli first heard them. Faint scratching in the walls, like fingernails tracing along the wood. He told his father, who only said, "It's mice, boy." Nothing more. But when Miriam started talking to the lady in the hall, Silas's heart grew heavy. He followed her one night, lantern in hand. Miriam stood near the stairwell, humming an old lullaby that Clara used to sing. Silas froze when a second voice, soft, melodic, finished the tune. He called out, "Who's there?" Silence. Only the flicker of the flame and the scent of lilac drifting past him. He whispered into the emptiness, "Clara, is that you?" But the only answer was the wind sighing through the coffin boards. That night, Silas dreamed of his wife. She stood barefoot in a meadow, wearing the same lilac dress she'd been buried in. She smiled, but her eyes were filled with sorrow. "You built our resting places into your home," she said. "You couldn't let go, Silas." But love cannot live where grief is nailed shut. When he reached for her, she turned to ash, and he woke to the sound of hammering, but not his own. Someone or something was pounding from inside the walls. He rushed to Eli's room. The boy was asleep, but the hammering continued. Slow, rhythmic, hollow. Silas pressed his hand to the wall and felt it tremble. He whispered a prayer he hadn't said since Clara's death. "Lord, don't punish me for loving too much." The hammering stopped. Days later, a letter arrived by post. It was from Jonas Wainwright, an undertaker from Springfield, the man who'd sold Silas the coffin wood. "Mr. Crowe," it read, "I must confess that the lumber I sold you came from unclaimed coffins. The bodies were never buried, only removed when the city expanded the graveyard. Some say the spirits of those forgotten never found rest. If you hear strange noises or see unkind things, I advise you to bless the wood or burn it. The dead do not like being woken." Silas folded the letter and stared at the walls surrounding him. Burn the house? He couldn't. It was all he had, all that kept his children safe. So instead, he lit candles in every room and prayed until dawn. When the first light broke over the Ozarks, the house fell silent. But in the corner of Miriam's room, her doll, once smiling, now wore a carved frown. By spring, the mountain thawed, and a traveler came by, a young schoolteacher named Emma Price, who'd lost her way heading to the next town. Her horse had thrown a shoe, and Silas offered her shelter for the night. She noticed the odd timber work, the faint names along the boards. "This house feels sad," she said softly. Silas smiled wearily. "It's just old wood with older stories." That evening, they shared supper, and for the first time in years, Silas laughed. Emma had a gentle spirit, one that reminded him of Clara. Eli and Miriam liked her too. They begged her to stay another day. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She wandered downstairs and found a single candle burning on the mantel. The flame bent toward the wall as if drawn by breath. She leaned close and heard faint whispers, voices praying, pleading, "Let us rest." She fled to her room and locked the door. At dawn, Emma packed to leave, pale and trembling. "Mr. Crowe," she said, "this house, it's not right. You must let it go." Silas looked around the home he'd built. Every board a memory, every nail a piece of grief driven deep. "I can't," he whispered. "It's all that's left of her." Emma touched his hand. "Sometimes love is not holding on. It's setting free." That night, Silas gathered oil and matches. He meant to do it, to burn the coffin house and free whatever haunted it. But when he saw his children asleep beside the fire, he hesitated. Could he make them homeless again? He dropped the match and fell to his knees, sobbing. "I built this house from death," he cried, "but I swear, I'll fill it with life." Upstairs, a door creaked open, though no one had touched it, and the scent of lilac filled the air again. In the following days, Silas began to change. He took down the coffin boards one by one, replacing them with fresh lumber he cut from the nearby forest. Each time he removed a board, he prayed over it. "Rest now, whoever you were. Find Peace Eli and Miriam helped, though they didn't fully understand. When they pulled the last coffin plank from the wall, a small velvet pouch fell from between the cracks. Inside were 6 silver buttons and a lock of hair tied with a ribbon, Clara's. Silas sank to the floor, tears spilling down his cheeks. The realization hit him like lightning. The undertaker must have used Clara's coffin wood among the others. He hadn't built just any house from coffins. He'd built his wife's resting place into their home. That night, the house stood quiet. No whispers, no knocking, just the gentle sound of wind in the pines. Before bed, Miriam looked at her father and said, "Mama's happy now, isn't she?" Silas smiled through his tears. "Yes, sweetheart. She's home at last." Spring bled into summer, and for the first time in years, the Crowe family's laughter could be heard echoing through the hollows. Silas, once gaunt and silent, hummed while he worked, planing the new boards and teaching Eli how to drive nails straight. Miriam picked wildflowers and tucked them into the cracks between the planks. "So Mama can smell them," she said. Neighbors who had long kept their distance began visiting again. They brought food, tools, and curiosity. One man, the blacksmith Hank Dobbs, admitted, "Didn't think you'd last the winter up here. But looks like this place got a second life." Silas nodded. "It did, Hank." We all did. But late one evening, as he stood outside looking at the half-finished walls glowing gold in the sunset, a shiver went through him. The new boards creaked, not from the wind, but something deeper, like the house itself taking its first breath. While digging out new space for a garden, Eli struck something hard with his shovel. At first, he thought it was a rock. But when Silas helped him uncover it, they found a small rotted coffin lid. Beneath it lay nothing but dust and a tarnished locket. Inside the locket was a faded photograph, a woman and 2 children, their faces blurred with time. Silas carried it to the porch, studying the image by lantern light. Something in the woman's eyes felt familiar. Not Clara, but kind, tender, motherly. He turned the locket over and read the engraving, "Forever Together." 1873. That night, Silas realized that his land had once been a pauper's graveyard, the resting place of the unclaimed and forgotten. He whispered to the dark, "You've been crying for someone to remember you." From the woods, the wind answered with a low, mournful sigh. The next Sunday, Silas and his children placed candles all along the edge of the property, one for each grave they could find. Emma Price, the school teacher who had once fled in fear, returned when she heard of what they were doing. "It's beautiful," she said softly as dusk fell and the candles flickered like stars in the grass. Silas nodded. No one should be left unremembered. Together, they prayed, not for protection, but for peace. As they finished, Miriam pointed toward the coffin house. Through its upper window, a faint light shimmered. Not candlelight, but something pale and pure, like moonlight caught in glass. Emma gasped. "Do you see that?" Silas smiled faintly. "I think the house is saying thank you." Weeks later, a horseman arrived from Springfield, Jonas Wainwright, the undertaker who had sent the warning letter. His face was drawn and weary. "Mr. Crowe," he said, "I came to make things right. Those coffins, they were never meant to be sold. I've carried that guilt for years." Silas led him inside the newly rebuilt home. "You don't owe me apology, Jonas. The wood found its purpose. It gave me shelter when I had none. It taught me how to live again." Jonas looked around the house, touched the smooth new walls, and nodded. "Strange thing," he murmured. "The dead don't seem to haunt this place anymore." Silas smiled. "That's because they've been heard." Before leaving, Jonas handed him an envelope. a deed showing that the land was now registered as a memorial property, ensuring it would never be disturbed again. By autumn, the Crows' garden bloomed where the old coffins once lay. Tomatoes, corn, and pumpkins sprouted thick and full. "It's like the soil's alive," Eli marveled. "It is," said Silas. "It's been waiting to give something back." When the harvest came, the family invited the whole valley. Neighbors who once whispered about curses now feasted under lanterns hung from the oak trees. Children laughed, fiddles played, and for the first time, the mountain felt like home again. As the night wound down, Silas looked up at the coffin house glowing under the stars. He could almost swear he saw a woman's silhouette in the upstairs window, smiling. In November, a storm unlike any before tore through the Ozarks. Wind howled down from the peaks, and lightning split the sky. Silas rushed to secure the shutters as Eli and Miriam huddled by the fire. Suddenly, a crash shook the house. The great oak out front had fallen, its trunk slamming through the porch roof. The old coffin board Silas had stacked out back, meant for burning, caught fire from a lightning strike. Flames spread fast. "Out! Go!" Silas shouted, pulling his children into the storm. Rain lashed their faces, but the fire roared higher, consuming the last remnants of death that had built their home. Emma arrived from the town below with help. They formed a bucket line, fighting to save what they could. But when dawn came, the coffin house was gone. Only a single corner of the foundation remained. Silas knelt in the mud, weeping. "All gone," he murmured. "Everything gone." Emma placed a hand on his shoulder. "Not everything, Silas. Look through the smoke. The sun broke over the mountains, and in its light, wildflowers already pushed through the ashes. Winter passed, and with spring came renewal. Silas began building again, but this time not alone. The townsfolk, moved by his story, came to help. Men brought lumber, women brought food, children carried nails and paintbrushes. Eli asked, "Pa, what'll we call this one?" Silas looked around at the laughing crowd, the busy hands, the new life sprouting where tragedy had stood. "Not the coffin house," he said with a soft smile. "This one'll be called the living house." Emma helped design it. Wide windows, sunlit rooms, and a front porch big enough for neighbors to gather. When it was finished, Silas carved a single phrase above the doorframe: "Built from loss, made for love." Months after they moved into the new home, strange things still happened, but not frightening ones. On calm nights, Eli swore he heard distant singing, the kind of soft, wordless hum his mother used to make when mending clothes. Miriam sometimes woke to the scent of lilacs drifting through her room, even in winter. Once, Emma found a small candle burning by itself in the corner, one of the vigil candles they'd placed for the forgotten souls. The flame flickered, then slowly went out, as if someone unseen had finally blown it away. Silas only smiled. "They're not haunting us anymore. They're visiting by 1895. Word of the coffin house that became the living house spread beyond the Ozarks. A journalist from St. Louis came to write about it, and soon after, a letter arrived from the state governor. The letter praised Silas Crowe for turning sorrow into service and announced plans to preserve part of the land as the Resting Fields Memorial, honoring the forgotten souls of Missouri's frontier. Silas read it aloud at the supper table, his voice breaking with emotion. Eli grinned. "Pa, people'll remember us now." Silas nodded. "Maybe, but I'd rather they remember the ones who were buried here first." That night, he walked to the hill overlooking the valley. The moonlight glimmered on the gravestones they'd set, and he whispered, "You're not forgotten anymore." Years later, when Silas Crowe grew old and gray, his children carried him out to the porch one final summer evening. The air was warm, the fireflies thick as gold dust, and the sound of crickets filled the valley. Eli asked, "Pa, do you ever miss the old house?" Silas smiled, eyes shining in the firelight. "Sometimes. But I think it's still here, just changed. Everything built with love keeps living, even after we're gone." That night, as the family slept, a breeze swept through the open windows, carrying the scent of lilac and cedar. The walls creaked softly, not in warning, but in peace, and for just a heartbeat, the house seemed to breathe, slow, calm, alive. When dawn came, Silas was gone. He'd passed quietly in his sleep, a faint smile on his lips. They buried him beneath the oak tree that had fallen years ago, now sprouting new branches from its broken trunk. And every spring since, wildflowers bloom around the grave, no matter how harsh the winter before.